Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with one of the hardest hitting and critting builds in the entire game. It's a triple hit Earthquake build that, as you can see, can kill Julra in just 3 casts. It's absolutely ridiculous damage against bosses. We utilize Storm Crows as well for insane armor shred, basically more than doubling our damage. This build truly shines against bosses. When it comes to models, however, it does have a few weaknesses, and I'll go over those during the final verdict section of the build guide. But in this intro, I'm also going to include a quick showcase of how efficiently this build dispatches a 755 corruption Lagon in phase 1 of the fight, as well as a lightless arbor boss fight where we kill him in just a single cast of Earthquake. That should give you an idea of the kind of damage Earthquake can dish out. Anyways, let's jump into the build guide. Irashaimase! Alright, let's start by going over the skills that make this build deal such disgusting damage. But before we jump into it, I'm just going to mention that I'm not going to be covering things in as much detail as I did with my previous video, the Earthquake Aftershock damage over time video. And so if you find that I'm not covering things enough for you, maybe check out that video as well. I'm going to link it in the description of this one. So just check it out. See if it helps you. And with that, let's start with Earthquake. So basically with Earthquake, instead of going Aftershocks, we're now dealing damage through our initial hits with Earthquake. And so the most important thing to start off with is to get this Seismic Smash. It makes it so that the Aftershock damage modifiers on this skill tree apply to the initial hit damage as well. And you can no longer have Aftershocks as a trade-off. So basically what that means is this node right here gives you double damage for your Earthquake initial hits. And this one, again, double damage for your initial hits. So that's 4x the damage for these 10 points right here. After you take Seismic Smash, you also want to take Seismic Tide, which puts Earthquake on a 2-second cooldown, but it makes it much more mana efficient. Now you cast essentially 3 Earthquakes for the cost of 2 Earthquakes. That's roughly what the trade-off works out to being. Not only that, but those 3 Earthquakes cast themselves, so you don't have to be spending time actually attacking and using up your attack animation for those 2nd and 3rd Earthquake hits. You can actually spend that time swiping or Warcry or anything else, and it frees up more space and more time for your character to do other things. So it's a very efficient node to take because 2 seconds cooldown is pretty low, and you can decrease it even further with some CDR on your boots or on your belt. So this is a great node to take right here. If you're going initial hit, I do recommend it. We tried a bunch of different iterations for Earthquake initial hit, one of which included not taking this node, and it did feel worse overall. So keep that in mind. I do recommend taking this node if you're going initial hit. And then on top of that, we always take Shatterquake. This is a free 2.5x damage multiplier as well. So between these two giving you 4x and this 2.5x, you're looking at a 10x just for these 3 nodes right here. And then you have another 1.4 multiplier here, as well as another 1.48 here. So we end up dealing 20x the damage roughly. Not to mention that added melee damage applies at 350% effectiveness for Earthquake's initial hit. So this is how Earthquake deals such disgusting damage. Every single point that we put in it right here goes into damage pretty much. Some honorable mentions here include Sunder. You do need some sort of source of armor shred when you're going initial hit because you're dealing physical damage, and armor shred helps the most for physical damage builds. However, we have addressed armor shred through different means, namely through Storm Crows. So we decided to opt against putting points in here, which is also why we haven't put points into the Harder They Fall, which is a pretty good node. 20% more damage versus bosses. That's great. It's just the investment of 2 points into Sunder makes it not worthwhile. Potency is decent as well, but we don't want to be losing any more area because Earthquake already feels very clunky in monoliths, because of the area being so tiny. So I would not recommend getting too many points in potency. Maybe just 1 point if you happen to have one extra. And given that we're dealing triple hit, and that makes us fairly mana efficient, and it opens up time for us to swipe, which recovers mana as well, I don't think we need buffet right here. We don't need the 30% mana efficiency. The only thing I would mention is it's too bad we lose stun chance, but we do recover it through concussion. So that's the earthquake setup. For swipe, we get rid of the culling, which is actually unfortunate because culling is great. 14% kill threshold is really strong. And instead of culling, we make sure we get Twin Fangs. And Twin Fangs is insane. 12% crit multi per stack, double for dual wielding. So it's 24 crit multi per stack. We have 7 stacks. That is 24 times 7, giving us 168% crit multi for 7 stacks of Aspect of the Panther. It is one of the highest sources of crit multi in the entire game that I'm aware of. I can't think of anything else giving you more than 168 crit multi in a single node. It's absolutely crazy. I would not recommend going more than 3 points in Sabertooth's Endurance because of the health regen. And anything extra, put into Fizz Res Shred. Frenzy Totem, compared to the previous build, we took out 5 points from Reach and put them into Dig Deep. Another free 90% crit multi. Can't go wrong with that. Other than that, there's just really not much else to be done with Frenzy Totem. With Warcry, we changed things up quite a bit. We took out a lot of points from Area and from Staggering Roar, and even 1 point out of Brutality. In order to get Bringer of Winter, the extra crit chance and the chill chance are perfect for the build because, as you recall, we need a source of chill for Shatterquake, and this is actually a great source if you also happen to need crit chance. So this node is incredibly strong, but that makes it so that we need to have Warcry at 100% uptime, so we need to have Shallow Breath for the 50% cooldown reduction. So you can see with some of the cooldown reduction that we have on items, we can bring it down to 4 seconds cooldown, which is perfect. It has a 4-second duration for Bringer of Winter and a 4-second cooldown. It lines up super well. It also gives us a cleanse. Dropping 1 point out of Brutality is not great because we lose 4 melee physical damage from that one stack, but it's not the end of the world either. And finally, the last skill that we have, I tried a few different things. I tried running Maelstrom, triggered by Warcry with Whirlpool right here. Unfortunately, that felt very clunky because of how expensive Maelstrom is. Even with the 50% mana cost reduction, it still felt way too expensive. And mainly what we're getting out of this is stun chance. So I felt like it just wasn't enough. We weren't getting any damage per se. We were getting some haste, but overall it was not worthwhile the investment. So we tried also running Stormcrows, and that ended up being really, really strong. And that's mainly because of this Feathered Storm node right here. 4% armor shred chance per point of strength and 4% armor shred effectiveness per point of strength. If you recall, we have like 130 strength, I think, currently with this build, and we can get it up to 150 depending on our itemization. So for simplicity, let's just assume 150. That's 600% armor shred chance and 600% armor shred effect, which means that every stack of armor shred counts for 7 stacks of armor shred, and we're applying 6 at a time. So every hit from the Stormcrows is essentially 42 stacks of armor shred for every single hit of the Stormcrows, and we have 4 Stormcrows. So this basically melts all of the armor and brings us to the armor shred cap roughly of dealing 80 to 85% more damage with physical attacks. That is the impact of this single point right here. 80 to 85% more damage for our build against bosses in particular. Aspect of the Crow is really strong as well. It gives us 3 melee lightning damage per stack. And I've noticed against bosses, we end up hovering around 15, 16, 17 stacks. So that's another 45 melee lightning damage. That's quite significant. So between these two nodes, I do think we're getting something like double damage for our build. On top of that, we get shocking display. The shock chance is great because it increases the chance of stun for the enemy. And it also gives us more lightning damage. So if you happen to have, for some reason, lightning damage on your weapon, we just so happen to have that. This is pretty nice. Even if you don't have lightning damage anywhere, this is a good node to max out. And then we also end up using Stormcrows for a mobility skill. Our traversal skill right here is thanks to Sky Passage. So now we no longer need to run Fury Leap because Stormcrows provides us that mobility. And then we finally just reduce the cooldown of it a little bit. Make sure to max out this node as well for the cast speed and move speed. And that's about it. We have an extra point. I think we put it over here. So Stormcrows serve the purpose of buffing our damage, giving us mobility, as well as activating one of our passive skills that I'll talk about a little bit later. I do think Stormcrows is by far the best supplementary skills that we can utilize here for boss fights. Unfortunately, in monos, the Stormcrows just die all the time. And when they're dead, you cannot teleport with Crowstorm. It just kind of casts it, but you stay in the same place. So I think the only way to possibly address that is by running Hacker's Phoenix, which at the very bottom it says, when a companion is down, it is automatically revived after 2 seconds. This has a 10-second cooldown though. So that bonus on Hacker's Phoenix could prove sufficient to keep your Stormcrows a little bit more viable in monos. But overall, the playstyle that I opted for was to run a unskilled 0 points Fury Leap for monos and for just dungeon traversal, and then right before the boss fights, whether it's Lagon or whether it's any boss, I just pop the birdies, cast them, and you can see they melt everything. And I can demonstrate to you the high crit damage numbers that we get with and without Stormcrows. So you can see here without Stormcrows, we can get something like 10 mil crits, roughly 9 to 10 mil crits. And with Stormcrows, we're getting like 19 mil crits. You saw it right there. And I'll show you again. With Stormcrows, 11, 15, 23 mil crits. I think I saw a 23 mil crit. So Stormcrows more than double our damage against bosses. So they're definitely worth it to keep around. It's just I haven't found a solution for their squishiness just yet. So if you can find that solution, do let me know, because right now I just can't even run them in monos. And granted, I'm not running the Hacker's Phoenix that I talked about, so I have to try that out and see if that's viable. But based on my test so far, it just looks like Leap Attack with 0 skill points in it is probably a better option. So now let's go over the itemization changes that I'm making for this build in particular. You'll notice only 2 of the items are different, the helmet and the offhand. Everything else is identical to the other build that I was running, the Aftershock DoT Build. So I'm only going to talk about these 2 item slots, and if you're curious and need more detail about the other item choices, either look at my build planner that I'm going to put in the description, or go and check out the other video if you need the actual explanation around the item choices as well. So let's start with Peak of the Mountain. Basically, the main difference between this build and the other build is we actually need to max crit chance on top of everything else that we're doing with our items. So that makes the itemization significantly more complicated and difficult to achieve compared to the other build. So Peak of the Mountain gives us up to 290% crit chance. It can easily spawn with 3 LP, and if you're patient enough, you can even get a 4 LP one. Because of the fact that it is a legendary item that isn't guaranteed to have 4 LP, you're likely going to be losing affixes relative to the other build guide, and so that makes the build and itemization a little bit trickier as well. So keep that in mind. For the offhand, what we need to get from the offhand is flat melee critical strike chance. Here I've opted for an Eagle Wing, which gives us 4% implicit crit, as well as I have a prefix of another 5% tier 5 melee critical strike chance flat. So that's 9%. I think that's probably the bare minimum you can get away with. I would recommend the best in slot for this kind of build is a Hacker's Phoenix with a tier 7 flat melee crit, so 10% melee crit, plus the 4% implicit. That's going to give you 14%. I do believe that is best in slot, also because of the +2 Primalist melee attack skills, and as well as the 2-second revival for companions. I think that's pretty good for the birdies that we talked about running. But getting a 1 LP Hacker's Phoenix and slamming a flat melee crit is not easy. That's why I'm running an Eagle Wing, and here are a few other alternatives as well. I mean, a Cleaver solution, 2 or 3 OP with a tier 7 flat melee crit is always a good choice, especially because it's pretty easy to get 2 or 3 LPs, so you have a pretty decent chance of slamming that tier 7 melee crit. A few good exalted options are other items that have implicit crit chance in them, like a bunch of different daggers. Here's Obsidian Dagger, 4% crit chance implicit, and you can get a prefix of another 5%. I happen to have melee attack speed in this one, but flat damage is good as well, just depending on the playstyle you want to go for. Crit multi one-handers are solid as well, so that's Katana and Doom Star, both are decent, but you must get a tier 7 melee critical strike chance in them for them to be viable in my mind. So that's basically the itemization adjustments that you want to make for this build in order to make it work, and in order to make it dish out, 23 mil crits on the dummy and kill Julra in 3 hits or Heart of the Mountain in 1 hit. And now let's talk about idols. For idols, you no longer need to run the 4x1, which gives you Thorn Totem on hit. And so instead of that one, I've opted for a 7 Vitality, Aspect of the Lynx duration idol. I think Aspect of the Lynx is quite strong for this build, and it is another significant reason to run Stormcrows is Aspect of the Lynx, and I'll go over it in more detail with the passive section. But that's mainly the only difference between this build and the other build in terms of idols. When it comes to blessings, the only change is we're switching HP to crit multi right here. Everything else is the same: mana, Aures, Fizz Shred, armor. In terms of passives, there are no differences in the Primalist tree. We have toned down a few points out of the Druid tree. I think 2 here and 1 here. And we've taken out a few points out of the Shaman tree. I think 3 points out of Tempest form, and just brought it to the bare minimum in order to hit Earthquake. And we've moved around some points in the Beastmaster skill tree as well. I think we took out 2 out of Axe and Claw, 2 out of these here, just to be able to get Cry of the Lynx up to 5, as well as Serrated Claws up to 6. And the reason we want to do that is Aspect of the Lynx gives us 100% critical strike chance and 100% stun chance. That is a very, very strong buff to have. We can't really afford to miss out on that, especially when you add the 120% crit multi that we get from Serrated Claws. And you also get another 25% crit chance from this node itself. So the only issue is 5-second duration is not that great, given that we have a 5-second cooldown on our Stormcraw's Crawl Storm. And that's why I opted for this idol, to just get the duration a little bit higher and be able to move some points around. For example, getting 1 extra point into Nature's Embrace for an additional crow, putting us at 4 crows max. And that's about it. Those are the changes that we made to the passive skill tree. Everything else is just the same as the other skill tree. Again, if you're curious about some of the choices that we've made here, go to the other video and take a look at that one. All right, we've got another amazing build that we need to grade. So let's talk about the final verdict for our Earthquake triple crit build that can take down Julra in just 3 hits. Basically 10 seconds is what you saw in the video. And it's again 10 to 15 seconds, S+ tier, easy peasy, nothing to talk about here. It is with monoliths where we have a little bit more differentiation and weaknesses and strengths versus the Aftershock DoT Build. So I've got the mobility a little bit lower, and that's partially because we're having to rely sometimes on Stormcrows, sometimes on Leap Attack, and it can be a little bit awkward. Leap Attack, if you actually skill into it like we did with this build, You get to reset that cooldown every now and then. It also has 24% CDR in the skill tree as well. So mobility is a little bit lower than the Aftershock build. In terms of overall tier, I put it at S-, and that's partially because of the survivability. When it comes to survivability, the triple crit build has affix problems. And what I mean by that is you just have so many things that you need to itemize for. It's just difficult to fit everything in your item slots. When it comes to the helmet, you kind of need a 4 LP peak of the mountain to fit everything, just because there's so many important options. You saw in my case, I lost the 8 strength as well as 30% damage reduction from crits, as well as a bunch of armor. And that's very painful. At that point, I'm not mitigating all the crit damage. So I put the survivability a little bit lower. Another issue that you run into with this build in monos is that the AoE for the earthquake is not massive at all. It's pretty puny, and so it's kind of difficult when you run into large amounts of ranged enemies. The earthquake Aftershock DoT build, these aftershocks actually pan out from your earthquake and kind of home in on enemy archers, and since they don't move and they just kind of attack you from a distance, the aftershocks are pretty good at dealing with archers. They're surprisingly nice. Whereas with earthquake triple crit, you have to go and walk all the way under the archers, hit them, see if you caught all of them with your earthquake, and if you didn't, keep chasing every one of them. It's kind of annoying. So ranged enemies are a problem. On top of that, there are 3 different modifiers that this build does not care about when it comes to mono clear, but this build is significantly hindered by. And those 3 are crit strike avoidance for enemies. That's very painful. Crits are like 6x the damage for earthquake triple crit build. Glancing blow is a problem, as well as dodge. All 3 of those are a problem. This build does not care about dodge. So this is why I like that I tested both of these builds in quick succession. I can easily identify strengths and weaknesses that they have relative to each other. One last thing I should highlight with the earthquake triple crit build is that it basically forces you into dual wielding. You no longer have the option of running a shield. It's just you lose a lot of crit if you do when it comes to the swiped skill tree. But also you need all those affixes. You need the crit chance. You need a lot out of your build when it comes to this triple crit. So Aftershock DoT just has way more flexibility, especially when it comes to itemization. So this is why I have multiplayer utility at A+, the same, and cost to itemize significantly lower. This build just has a lot more requirements to make it work. I still have it at A, and the reason for that is Earthquake is just super strong. So even if you don't have the perfect items, you're still going to dish out crazy damage. So final tier, I have it at S. It's, in my opinion, a worse build than the Earthquake Aftershock DoT build, but it is still so much fun. 23 mil crits on the dummy. Killing Julra with 3 hits is just something that no other build can do. So still a top tier build that everybody should try at some point or another. And that's our final verdict. And to wrap up, let's check out a Corruption 755 monolith clear with this build. I ran it with like 300% extra elemental damage. So some of those elemental hits hurt quite a bit. You can see that I'm having to kite more so than usual. And this video also demonstrates really well what I was talking about earlier when it comes to dealing with ranged enemies. I specifically picked a monolith clear that felt very awkward, tons of ranged enemies. None of them want to go up to you in melee where your earthquake shines, so it makes the clear very awkward. We'll still finish it though, with only one scary moment during the entire thing. So 755 corruption monoliths are definitely doable with this build. You can push it even further with better itemization, most notably getting that 100% crit damage reduction. But yeah, for the next build guide, I'm going to try out a few different build ideas that I have for Beastmaster before moving on to something else. And I also wanted to announce that I've started multi-streaming on Twitch and YouTube at the same time. So if you happen to see the YouTube stream live, usually it's in the evenings and nighttime. But yeah, if you happen to see it live, hop on, say hello, see what's up. And you know, feel free to ask any questions that you have. I'm always happy to answer anything. Always happy for more people to join in on the live stream. So I hope to see you all there, and sincere thank you to everybody who has been showing up for the last however many months on Twitch. This is only going to allow us to reach out to more people, get a bigger community to arrive and bounce ideas off of, to get even more awesome builds. But anyways, that's it for the build guide. If you enjoyed it, if you found it valuable, please like and subscribe. And either way, I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy. ごちそうさまでした。